All right, we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's information meeting about the revised development proposal for 37 Wildpine in Stittsville. I'm Glenn Gower, and I'm the city councilor here in Stittsville, and I'm glad to see a good turnout tonight. We've got nearly 30 people who've logged in, and perhaps we'll have some more join us as we go. I know you're all taking time out of your busy schedules. At least it's a bit of an overcast, rainy night here in the summer. So the agenda for tonight, we're going to have an overview presentation from the applicants, who I'll introduce you to in just a moment, followed by a Q&A for residents where you can share your questions and comments with the applicant team, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. When we get to the Q&A, if you do have a question, there's a couple of ways that you can participate. You can either raise your hand to speak using the raise hand function on Zoom, or you can type in a question or a comment to the Q&A panel, which is also on Zoom. Now, if you're on a desktop or a laptop, you'll find the buttons for that along the bottom of your screen. And if you're on your mobile phone, it depends what kind of phone and what version of Zoom you're using. But usually if you click around on the screen, you'll find either the raise hand function or the Q&A function. So you can type in your question or comment there, and we can read them out on your behalf. We hope that tonight's meeting will be a space for people to listen and to learn and to share your comments in a respectful way. And please note that we are recording this meeting, and it will be posted on YouTube later on, as well as to my website. We'll also share the slide decks that you'll see tonight as well to my website. So this is a development application, or a meeting about a development application, because the City of Ottawa has received a revised Plan of Subdivision and a revised zoning bylaw amendment application for 37 Wildpine Court. The applicant, Latitude Homes, has halted the original plan of condominium, and they're proposing a revised draft plan that includes a 4-story apartment building and a semi-detached home on the site. The previous draft plan had proposed to build 27 townhomes and 2 semi-detached homes, but that's no longer the plan. We're looking at this new revised plan for the 4-story apartment building. Putting things a little bit in context, so in 2020, Ottawa City Council declared a housing and homelessness emergency, and currently there are over 11,000 households on the centralized waiting list for social housing, and wait times for social housing in Ottawa can be up to 5 years or more. Work is underway at all 3 levels of government around policy and funding to try to address the housing crisis, and both the private and public sector are involved to help build affordable housing and housing in general. The provincial government wants to see 151,000 homes built in Ottawa over the next 10 years. And we're currently achieving about half of that rate of growth in Ottawa. And that, I wanted to put this in context for why we are seeing so many development applications coming through in Stittsville and across the city. And in particular, why we are seeing more and more apartment applications coming in. It's an important piece of context there. Where we are in the planning process, we're in the public and technical review phase. So this is where city planners take comments and feedback from all sorts of stakeholders, including residents and neighbors, including internal city staff and departments, and including external stakeholders as well. And they will be compiling all of those comments and providing feedback to the applicant, and then they'll move into the issue resolution stage, where any problems or issues or questions that might arise from the original proposal would have to be addressed by the applicant. And then eventually, city staff, city planners would prepare a report to go in front of planning committee. And that report would either recommend approval of the application if staff are satisfied that it meets all of the requirements, or staff may recommend to refuse the application, and then planning committee would have to decide, and then planning committee's decision would then go to city council for final approval. So we still have quite a few steps and quite a bit of time ahead of us here. The feedback we've heard so far, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the most common themes are around the traffic impact, the environmental impact with the proximity to the Pool Creek floodplain, the number of units in this building, and I guess the type of units, how many bedrooms and so on, concerns about parking, and noise and privacy, a concern about potential impacts from construction, a concern about capacity of the servicing and infrastructure, and also some concerns about design and aesthetics. So I'm sure we'll have questions and comments as we go tonight, and that's what the applicant team is here to try to answer and address. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to provide your comments in writing to Lisa Stern, who's the city planner for this file. Her phone number and email address are up on the screen. You can also find them on my website, which is glengower.com. Also, if you wish to receive notification of any future meetings or reports or formal steps in the process, you can also contact Lisa to be asked to be added to the notification list. And by doing so, you'll receive notice of future meetings, notice of staff's formal recommendation on the application, information on speaking or providing feedback to the planning committee when it eventually gets to that stage, and also information how you can appeal council's decision. So if you do provide comments to Lisa, you will be eligible to appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So that's another important aspect. So with that, I'd like to stop my screen share and welcome Jamie Posen and the applicant team. Jamie, I'll let you introduce the project and also introduce the folks who are here tonight on behalf of the applicant.
Sounds great. Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for organizing this meeting. And I'll say hello to everybody who's joining tonight. And again, I'll echo Councillor Gower's thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule and your evenings at home to join us to learn a bit more about this project. So I'll just turn it over to Tamara, if she can just share the screen. Perfect. So this is showing up for me. Hopefully it is for everybody else. So we're going to do a little presentation here as the applicant team. I'm going to introduce ourselves in a more formal way in a moment. But of course, the address, I'm sure everybody knows, is 37 Wildpine Court. And we've included on this title page sort of a basic rendering of how we're currently envisioning this development to look. Tamara, next slide, please. So with regards to an agenda of what we're going to be talking about, we'll start with some introductions, do a little bit of project history too. I suspect there are probably lots of people on this call who actually might have been here for the previous public meeting with the previous design, and we can talk about that a bit. Some details on the proposed development, and then Tamara will walk you through the planning and regulatory context that we're currently in, as well as a general timeline of the process. So by way of introductions, as mentioned, my name is Jamie Posen. I'm an associate with FO10 Planning and Design, and together with my colleague Tamara, we are the consulting planners on this file. You will notice that after my name, there are some letters, RPP, MCIP. That stands for Registered Professional Planner, and that is a professional designation in the province of Ontario and indeed across the country. So similar to just like you would have a professional designation if you're an accountant or a physiotherapist. That's a similar thing for the planning profession as well. So I'm registered professional planner, and Tamara is well on her way to getting that designation herself. And we also have two members of the developer team as well. We have Carmine and Rod, who are here currently. Their videos are off, but if occasion allows for any questions or anything that pertain to their work, then they can chime in. We'll go to the next slide, please. So a little bit of project history. The first bullet point here is regarding submission 1, which was made in September 2021. So we're coming up on the 2-year mark of when the original application was made. And again, I suspect a lot of people on the call were quite familiar with this application. On the right-hand side, we've included a screen grab of the site plan at that time for the 27 townhouses and 2 semis that you see there. This is oriented a little bit sideways. So if you imagine Ravenscroft is sort of on the bottom of the screen, Wildpine sort of on the right. And at that time, it proposed a connecting street between the two, as well as a private lane. And that's why the condominium application was submitted that Councillor Gower was referencing earlier. And so that application, as I said, involved several townhouses. You can see an example in the bottom left corner of the screen. And there was a statutory public meeting at that time in December of 2021. That's where I suspect we may have met before. And between that time and now, there was a fairly lengthy technical circulation process. Now, the technical circulation process is standard for all types of development applications. It goes through city staff, so that could be like engineering staff, for example. It also goes through sort of emergency services, waste management. It goes through the counselor's office, of course. It goes through any community associations or community groups. So it's quite a very involved and collaborative process in that sense. So the technical circulation had been going on for quite some time. Maybe we'll go to the next slide here. And so currently, we have a revised proposed development, and I'm going to walk through in a moment why the change, but just to give you some details here. Fundamentally, we're talking about a 4-story low-rise apartment building. We have an image here on the left that sort of illustrates looking from the south to the north. So it's almost like you're standing at the current tip of Wildpine. There's a total of 94 units proposed, including 31 one-bedroom, 29 one-bedroom plus den units, and also 34 two-bedroom units. A total of 117 parking spaces proposed, largely underground, and that includes both resident and visitor spaces, as well as 51 bicycle parking spaces in accordance with the zoning bylaw requirement. So let's go to the next slide, please. So why did the design change? There are actually a few reasons, and Councillor Gower touched on some of them. One of them was actually a technical issue, with regards to stormwater runoff and drainage. So just a quick primer. So stormwater management is basically the technical process of collecting and safely disposing of rainwater in a way that doesn't contaminate the receiving water body, but also doesn't cause flooding on surrounding properties, potentially such as those owned by people here today. This is a standard part of the planning process, no matter what type of application, but particularly for something like a plan of subdivision, it's an integral part. So through the technical circulation process I was talking about, the team refined the design a few times in response to comments from both the City of Ottawa and the Conservation Authority, I should have mentioned, has authority here as well. But each lot, in the previous design with the 27 townhouses, each lot required kind of an individualized stormwater collection and conveyance system. And because of the proposed lot coverage, it meant that there wasn't a lot of room for stormwater storage before it can be properly conveyed. So this was sort of rubbing up against the requirements from both the City and Conservation Authority criteria. So one reason for the change is actually that by proposing a single building with centralized stormwater collection facilities, water can more effectively be collected and treated. And we're quite sensitive to the need for that, given the surrounding sensitive environmental features that we can go into in a moment. And additionally, actually, this design has around 30% less hard surfacing than the previous design, which actually means that there's more land for stormwater to naturally percolate into the soil. So that was basically one of the reasons why this redesign made some sense. Secondly, there is the response to the ongoing housing emergency. So of course, Councillor Gower mentioned this in the introduction, that this is of course a serious issue, not just in Ottawa, not just in Ontario, and not even just Canada. This is sort of a worldwide issue, and it's particularly being felt very acutely here in Ottawa. Now that is general supply, so just the need for more housing in general, but also the need to kind of right size the increased supply, which is that in Stittsville in particular, there is a need for smaller units. Now that could be things like retirees who are downsizing, they don't necessarily want to maintain the whole house like they used to and would rather have something smaller. It could be single young professionals who maybe have a job in Canada and they want to live closer to that work, or it could be a whole range of a whole spectrum of demographics and sort of life situations why people would need a smaller unit, and there's kind of a lack of that in Stittsville at the moment, and so this was an opportunity to try to fill that need. And number three is that there's a new policy framework. So the City of Ottawa in particular has a new official plan that came in November of last year. So that's basically right in the middle of between submitting the original application to now. And Tamara is going to walk you through some of the details of what that new plan says. But it is definitely echoing, like I say, the importance of providing housing for those who need it and increasing the supply, but also it's also echoing at the provincial level some of the legislative changes that have been made to the Planning Act, Development Charges Act, Conservation Authorities Act. There's been several changes recently in the last couple of years, and there are also some forthcoming changes to what's called the Provincial Policy Statement, soon to be called the Provincial Planning Statement, all of which are of a piece, which is trying to increase, the supply of housing, which is so badly needed for so many. So those are effectively the three main reasons for the change. Maybe we'll go to the next slide, Tamara. And so we're talking about a plan of subdivision. So plan of subdivision is a process, but it's also a drawing. And so one of the main deliverables as part of the application to the City of Ottawa is what's called a plan of subdivision. So it's prepared by a surveyor. And we see an extract here of exactly what this is currently proposed to look like. So you can see that it creates a few blocks as well as a street connection. So one of the things being proposed is continuing that idea of the street connection between Ravenscroft and Wildpine to create that extra connectivity, create redundancy, healthy redundancy in the road network. But we'll go to the next slide. We've put some colors, overlaid some colors over top just to differentiate. So just to clarify, we have, starting with block 1, important to recognize that just like the previous application, the bulk of this property is proposed to be retained and not developed. So this is a large area that includes the existing wetland, and includes Pool Creek. It includes a lot of existing vegetation. None of that is going to be touched. On block 2, we have the orange. That's the area proposed for the 4-story apartment building that we are seeing some images of. And on block 3 in the blue to the south, that's a block that's created kind of with the residual space as a result of the road connection. And it actually creates a great opportunity for a couple of semi-detached units that can fit quite nicely on that space. But we'll go into some of the details of what that looks like in just a moment. I think that's everything for me. I'll turn it over to Tamara, and Tamara's going to walk you through the policy framework.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And I hope that this explanation helps you understand a little bit about not only the planning process, but this project in particular. So an important consideration that the official plan has highlighted is that Ottawa is projected to grow by 402,000 people between 2018 and 2046. And finding places for all these new residents to live is a really important consideration in that official plan. So that means not just building new housing or just building housing downtown or in the core, but building it across the city and in particular within the urban boundary. And the official plan outlines a growth management framework, and that's premised on the ability to provide enough development opportunities and an appropriate range of choices. And that means range and choice of housing types. And so one of the ways it does that is by introducing a target residential density, which is 40 to 60 units per gross hectare in neighborhoods. So that's a bit of an overview on the official plan and density targets from sort of the big picture. Now we're going to zoom into the site itself and the proposed development and how it fits into the official plan framework. So there are a few layers to consider when we're looking at the new official plan. First is the proposed development is located in the suburban transect. It's designated neighborhood and it's subject to the evolving neighborhood overlay. And those all have different significances within the plan. So I'll go through those one by one. So within the suburban transect, the official plan envisions a highly connected street network that makes it easier for everyone to get around, whether they're walking, cycling, or driving. And new development is intended to contribute to the evolution of 15-minute neighborhoods where residents can complete their daily tasks by biking or walking, and that would be envisioned within 15 minutes. So trying to keep everything they need close by and accessible. And one thing to note is with this site, there's an abundance of retail opportunities within walking distance. So this development we would be thinking of as contributing to that 15-minute neighborhood. Now, the neighborhood designation, that's another area that has some significance in the official plan. Built form and neighborhoods are intended to be low-rise, and low-rise heights range from 1 to 4 stories. A low-rise apartment building is an example of the kind of building that's supported and encouraged in those areas. And going back to those residential density targets, adding more housing to every neighborhood across the city and all of the wards is an important way to achieve that goal. And so another important consideration is the proximity to other designations in the official plan. So this site is close by to Stittsville Main Street. That's designated as a corridor, and the official plan wants greater densities to be closer to that corridor where people can go and do their shopping and access services, shops, and the things like that. And the last element is the evolving neighborhood overlay. That's applied to areas in close proximity to corridors, and it signals a gradual evolution over time where we would see the neighborhood character change to support intensification over the long run. So next I'm going to go into the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for the site. So just taking a quick step back, a zoning bylaw amendment application was submitted. And what that means is it's the process by which we bring the site zoning into conformity with the official plan. So a site zoning doesn't always match that official plan designation, and that's why we need to rezone. In some cases, the city might choose to rezone a site on its own so that it can reflect those changes in an official plan. But in our case, we're proposing to change the site zoning. And so you can think about it as sort of two different policy documents with different aims and intents. The official plan has more general policies, whereas the zoning bylaw gets into more fine-grained details. So this screen shows the site plan, and I'll layer on some information as we go through the proposed changes to the site zoning. So to the north, we have the low-rise apartment building. We're proposing to rezone that to residential fourth density subzone Z. Low-rise apartment buildings are permitted in the R4 subzone, and that's why we're proposing to use it. And then to the south, we're proposing to maintain the existing residential third density subzone XX, R3XX, but with a few adjustments just to account for that triangular lot shape. And R3XX permits a semi-detached dwelling, so we don't need to rezone it to something else. So I'll start off with the R4Z subzone. We're seeking relief from two provisions. The first is the minimum resident parking rate. And just as a note, we provide the required visitor parking rate. So the only rate that requires relief is for residents. So there will be 98 resident parking spaces, and that's for 94 units. So we'll have slightly more parking spaces than there are units. So every unit would potentially have access to one parking space. So we would have a rate of 1 parking space per unit. And the 1.2 parking space rates is really a holdover from amalgamation. Reducing the parking space rate from 1.2 to 1 is pretty common in development across the city and in comparable developments as well. So we do see this on a lot of files coming forward. And then we will, as a note on that visitor parking, we will be providing 19 visitor parking spaces, which is compliant with the zoning bylaw. And 15 of them are shown on the screen there at grade in front of the building, which means that visitors should be able to find them without too much trouble. That leads me to the second provision from which we'll be seeking relief, which is to permit parking in the front yard. So we would generally prefer to have the vehicle parking set a little bit further away from the creek to the north, which is why it's been brought further down between the street and the building. If the parking were located in the rear yard, that would just bring the building closer to the street. So locating it in the front yard means that the building can be set deeper into the site, provide more distance between the proposed apartment building and the existing buildings. And it also keeps the parking further away from Pool Creek, which is also ideal. And for the semi-detached dwellings to the south, the proposed subzone is R3X. We would maintain that R3XX subzone and then seek relief from two specific provisions. And that's because when the two public roads were linked, it created a residual lot, and that can comfortably fit 2 semi-detached dwellings, but there is a little bit of relief required just due to the shape of the triangular lots and the way that we calculate things in the zoning bylaw. So just to ensure that there was enough rear yard space and just sufficient space for the future tenants to enjoy their backyard, And so that those rear lot lines match up with the neighboring properties, that building has been pushed a little bit further, closer to the front yard. So in order to make sure that we have sort of a compatible, cohesive rear yard condition with the other existing properties, that building has been brought forward, which requires relief to reduce the front yard setback. So 3 meters is provided when 6 meters is required. That is just a consequence of moving the buildings a little bit further. The one important thing to note is even though the relief required says it's 3 meters, that's from the building to the property line. The distance between the building and the edge of the street is over 7 meters, which is enough room to park a car. So each of these semi-detached dwellings would have 2 parking spaces per unit, 1 in the driveway and 1 in the garage. And the rear yard, that setback is required just due to the way it's calculated. We have to calculate the setback at the narrowest point, which is 3.9 meters. But it's important to know that the amount of space between the building and the rear yard gets bigger and bigger as you go down that property line. So it's not consistently 3.9 meters. There's a pinch point. And then also an important consideration when we were looking at the design was making sure that those semi-detached dwellings weren't located too close to the townhouses nearby. So we took a look at the minimum interior side yard setback. What we've proposed exceeds the minimum under the zoning bylaw, and that's just to make sure that these buildings aren't too close to the neighbors. And lastly, Councillor Gower went over a timeline earlier in the slide deck. This one is a bit of a visual version of that same timeline that he's mentioned. We can see where we are in the process with our current time in the timeline called out with the little blue bubble. And as Councillor Gower mentioned, going forward, the city would review the submission before the file would go to Planning and Housing Committee or Council. So that's all in the future and not something that's going to be happening in 2023, we don't think. And with that, we want to thank everyone for joining us and listening to our presentations. And I'll pass it back to Councillor Gower now.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie and Tamara. We already have a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A, so thank you to folks who've already sent that in. We have, by the way, about 30 people who are tuned in tonight. So if you have a question or comment, if you'd like to ask your question live, please raise your hand and we can we can bring you into the webinar room here. And if you just want to type in your question and I can read your question or comment on your behalf, you can use that Q&A panel. And I'll try as we go to group some together because we've got some similar questions. I think a few questions just looking for clarification to some of what I led off with. One is what type of housing is included in your use of the term home? And I think that might have been referenced to the provincial target for 151,000 new homes in Ottawa over the next decade. So home is a very broad definition. It's any home, apartment, townhome, condo, semi-detached, row house. It is basically any type of home, whether it's owned or rented and of any size. And maybe another important note is we would like to see, and the province would like to see, as much variety in that as possible. So I hope that answered your question. That's from Anonymous. Why does Stittsville need smaller housing units? I think perhaps Jamie and Tamara had explained a bit of that. Maybe I would answer that. We've seen a recent apartment building that opened near Stittsville, Maine and Orville, the 4-story Switzer building just south of Orville Street. And the folks I've met who live there, some of them are seniors or older adults. Some of them are, there's a couple of widowers there who wanted to move to Ottawa to be closer to family. There are some young professionals there. There are some young families there as well, like a couple with a young child. So all sorts of different people and types of families who may be looking for smaller homes. And I do hear quite a bit, in particular from seniors, looking for more options to downsize, but wanting to stay in Stittsville rather than having to leave the community. So I hope that answers the question there. And I'll share one of the comments that's come in here, which is it's a bit about the bicycle parking. So the bylaw requires 51 bicycle parking spots. And this is from Eric, who says the reality is that residents will likely have bicycles at a higher rate than 1 per 2 units. So more bicycle parking should be provided, especially with the push for 15-minute neighborhoods. So noted there. By the way, my team is here taking notes and keeping track of any comments as well that we'll be summarizing and providing to the planner for this file. So I'd just like to go to some folks who've raised their hands. So in no particular order here, Ian, I'm going to prompt you to unmute. Once you get that prompt, if you could unmute.
I think I've done that now.
You have. Hi, Ian. We can hear you.
Hi, my name is Ian Rayburn. Excuse me, I'm a resident in Stittsville. I have a bit of an advantage. I used to be a member of the Committee of Adjustment with the City of Ottawa, and I'm extremely familiar with FO10 development. They were always at every meeting. And I wrote down so many notes, again, with so many developers and developments. They never seem to be able to fit within the plan. They're always looking for variances. And the young lady just mentioned they want to cut the front yard setback in half. They want to cut the backyard setback in half. I took a look at some of this stuff. They've changed so much. The city, I know, could refuse, but my history with the Committee of Adjustment and following city politics quite closely, the city won't refuse. The city is going to let this fly through. I can guarantee that. I see with 94 units and 117 parking spaces, that's less than 1.5 parking spaces. I think this is why where I live, I'm fortunate. I'm in Amberwood Village, and cars don't park on the road and usually don't park in the driveway. But I know the streets behind me, Victor Street, for instance, the cars are parked all along the road, all in the driveway, because they don't have enough room to park. I see that block 1 is not to be touched. I don't believe it, because somewhere down the line, block 1, which was that green block, I believe, I know will be touched. You talk about somewhere 40 to 60 residences in the future per hectare. That's 16 to 24 units on a 210 foot by 210 foot lot. Outrageous. And again, why do you not comply with the zoning bylaw? I know why, and people who think ahead of the bottom line know why you don't comply with the zoning bylaw. You want to put as much on as little as possible. And what happens, and my final thought, thank you so much, Mr. Gower, for listening to me, is like so many of these other things these days that they put up, they're going to look like Potemkin villages, just like those houses next to the giant tiger. Your building, folks, I'm sorry, is going to be another Potemkin village. And that's what happens to Stittsville. I used to own a farm outside of Stittsville when Stittsville was just one main street, and it's grown into a zoo. Thank you, Mr. Gower. I appreciate your patience.
Okay, thank you, Ian, for your comments. I think there were two points that perhaps FOTEM would like to address. One is about zoning and variances, and the other was the specific question about block 1. And I think we may need to bring up a map to put that in context. So Jamie, can you address both of those issues, please?
Yes, absolutely. And Ian, thank you very much for your questions, and also, I guess, for your previous service to Committee of Adjustment. Obviously, we really appreciate everyone who's involved in the process in one way or another, and including coming to this meeting tonight. So lots to unpack in your questions there. I guess the first thing I just want to state, and maybe this is actually for the benefit of everyone else, is to clarify that we at FO10 FO10 Planning and Design, also known as FO10 Consultants, we are not the developers here. We're not designing the buildings. We're not picking up a hammer. We're not doing that. We are the consulting planners on the file. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're professional planners that are helping to facilitate this process, for one thing, to travel through the approvals process as we're doing here tonight. But we're not actually, at least not in this context, we're not actually designing the building. So I think I just want to make that clear to everyone that our role is sort of distinct from maybe as what might have been misinterpreted there. The first thing I want to mention is about the variances. So the variances that Tamara was going through, particularly with regards to block 3, so you can see on your screen there in the corner, is the triangular block, and yeah, colored in blue there. So that's the block that's proposed to accommodate the 2 semi-detached buildings, or to semi-detached dwellings rather, so just one set of 2. And the way that we came to that, that internal discussion amongst the project team about how to deal with that block, it started with the point about connecting the 2 roads. So we have Ravenscroft, which terminates, we have Wildpine, which terminates, and the plan all along, some on this call may recall from the previous public meeting a couple of years ago, that it was expressed by the City of Ottawa that the original plan of subdivision always had these 2 streets connected. And it was just a matter of time before this particular block was redeveloped. So this is a standard process that happens all the time across the city and elsewhere, where the plan is made, but it just relies on certain a sequencing of events. So now that that street is being proposed to connect, we have street number 1. There are certain standards that need to, and certain geometries that are just a reality that these 2 streets are going to connect, and we're left with a residual space in between block 3, that triangular space. So we are left with a choice about what to do with that. Now the problem is that because it's privately owned and it's really too small, that the city will not really have any interest in taking a small space like that, because there's not very much that you can do to program it. That space had the potential to become a real kind of potential safety issue. So there's a concept called CPTED, which is crime prevention through environmental design. And the thing about CPTED is that you don't want to create ambiguous space. That tends to be where people sort of, congregate, or they dump garbage, or they, maybe hide behind trees and do things that they shouldn't be doing, that type of thing. It's not good to create these small residual spaces with nothing going on. It just so happened that as well, it actually quite comfortably accommodates a set of semi-detached dwellings. And in light of what we were saying before, given the city's policies, provincial policies, and the need for more housing, this was a perfect opportunity to put a compatible housing form in there. The thing is, because of the weird shape of the lot, when you actually place the semi-detached dwellings on that space, it doesn't, with regards to zoning definitions, it doesn't really fit quite nicely in regards to when you're measuring things like the, setbacks and distances, just because of the, Pythagoras and all that about how the corner is treated with regards to semi-detached units that are flush going the other way. So what you end up with is a situation where there are a couple of variances that are needed just to accommodate the square building on a triangular lot that just pops up anyway. But there were a couple, and Tamara alluded to this, there were a couple of decisions that also had to be made about where is the best siting on this lot for these houses. And part of the logic was, well, let's try to push it towards the street to get it, an extra setback away from the 2 adjacent properties to the south and to the east. And perhaps they're on the owners are on the call here tonight, I'm not sure. But the logic there was to, push it away to get some extra space and to create more of an amenity space in the rear. And so the combination of that made a whole lot of sense to us, in some respects. So for example, the front yard, sure, we could have potentially met the front yard standard of 6 meters, but that would have required pushing the building back, which reduces the rear yard, brings it closer to the neighboring properties. We just didn't see that as desirable. And as I'm sure you'll know, Ian, from your days on Committee of Adjustment, the 4 tests of a minor variance, we're not going for a minor variance to be sure, but 4 tests of a minor variance basically are designed to take a look at exceptional circumstances where it makes sense to provide some zoning relief to create a better outcome, because the zoning is a bit of a blunt instrument. When it's applied, everywhere is painted with the same brush, and sometimes you end up with unique circumstances like this, a triangular lot. So really that's the thinking behind that. The other comment was about block 1 that we see on our screen in green, that I've said is not going to be touched. I don't know what to say beyond that. It's not going to be. It's sensitive environmental features, and it is, to my understanding, going to actually be transferred to the City of Ottawa. So it won't even be under private ownership following this development application. So I'm not sure when you're saying that it will be touched. I'm not sure where you're getting that necessarily, but that's the. And as a practical matter, I mean, even if someone wanted to touch it, or if the city wanted to do something with it, and I'm not saying it would, but even so, it's a wetland. You know, it's not even setting aside the sensitive environmental ecological features on there. It's not even something you can build on very easily anyway, and there's a large ridge as well, a slope. So I think those concerns are unfounded in this case.
Okay, thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Ian, for your comments and questions. What I'm going to try to do is sort of bounce back and forth between some of the written questions and comments and some of the folks who've raised hands. So there's a question, I guess, two parts to it, from Tanya, who asks about affordable housing. Are these units, because I mentioned affordable housing off the top, so are these units part of affordable housing? If so, our infrastructure is not built to sustain that. The public transportation network is not reliable. So if you could clarify first around the affordability question.
Yeah, certainly. So Tanya, thank you for the question. And I think we need to maybe put some clarity around what affordable housing is. And also distinguish between affordable housing versus housing affordability. And I think, as Councillor Gower pointed out, there's a housing emergency right now, which is a real crisis of housing affordability. One of the ways that you can help to ameliorate that is by providing more affordable unit types. That does not necessarily mean that they're subsidized. It's not what we might call social housing or rent geared to income or something like that. In this case, it's actually market housing, but just in a form that tends to be more affordable. So in other words, instead of a large single detached or even a townhouse or something like that, by virtue of the fact that it's larger, tends to be less affordable to many individuals as compared to an apartment. So to clarify with that, in this case, it's market-based housing, but also to clarify, because the comment was about public transit, and the implication there is that those who live in affordable housing are necessarily using public transit. In some cases that is true, in some cases that's not true, and particularly for market housing, as we were saying, the rate of parking being provided in this case is at a rate of 1 space per unit. So on the side of public transit needs for this site, there is going to be parking provided. Now, that's not to say that public transit isn't also valuable for anyone, even if you have a car. And of course, in the fullness of time, whether current and in future, Stittsville Main Street actually is well set up for transit facilities going forward. And there's some language in the official plan about that. And even if we're not seeing it right here today, the fullness of time, like I said, the point of planning is to look actually years in the future. So I hope I've covered the answer there, Councillor, like in terms of distinguishing between affordability versus,
So I want to add the second part to Tanya's comments. I think this is more of a comment than a question, but she writes, if they are regular apartments, that means at least 100 additional cars. She says people will not walk or bike to local shops. Most people still drive to do groceries. They drive to work and so on. And it's not feasible to have that traffic added on the 2 streets or Stittsville Main Street. I know we have some specific questions about traffic, which we'll get to later, but I did want to put that comment just on the record here. And Jamie, I'm going to ask something. You give very full and complete answers, but we're going to run. Sorry, we're going to go very, very late tonight, given the numbers. So I could ask a little bit more concise, so that we can just get as many answers in a reasonable time. I saw Marilyn's hand up, but it's gone down again. So we'll go to Steve. Steve, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, Glenn.
There you are. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Glenn. Hi, Jamie. Hi, Tamara. Thanks very much, Glenn, for organizing this, and really appreciate the information you shared. I did put a couple of questions in the chat too, and maybe we can get to those if we have time. I have the same concerns that everyone has voiced. I did send in my comments in a little more detail, but yeah, I strongly oppose this for so many reasons. We've gone from 27 townhomes and 2 semi-detached to a 4-story building with 96 units. And that doesn't count the number of people, vehicles, scooters, everything that's going to be in the neighborhood. And I find it irresponsible by the developer to put this kind of a proposal, and hopefully it won't get approved. After hearing Ian's comments, I'm even more concerned because I understand the need for affordable housing, but I think this is just too much for this area. The streets, there's no sidewalk on Ravenscroft. And I just think it takes away from the quality of living on not only Ravenscroft, but Wildpine and Main Street. There's been a lot of good work discussing the development of Main Street and trying to take traffic off it. And you're putting this huge volume of traffic. We've talked about vehicles, and I agree it's going to be 100 or more vehicles onto Main Street. And that doesn't include delivery vehicles going to the apartment building. We all know how much Uber is out there, taxis, and the seniors home already on Wildpine and the vehicles that are going there. We don't have a light at Ravenscroft, and it's very difficult, and we've seen accidents coming out of there already with just the residents and the traffic, the local traffic there. And so I don't agree with the proposal. I don't agree with the streets being connected because I think that's unsafe, and I think it's unsafe for not only the existing people but for the new potential tenants. I just think it's much too big for the area, and it's putting an additional burden onto Main Street that we've been trying to avoid. There's nowhere else they can go. They have to go onto Main Street, and I don't think it's safe. And the traffic calculations, I tried to go through that on through all the documents, and but it's not clear to me how they've arrived at that calculation and what they've included, and whether they've included any traffic from businesses and stuff like that. So maybe I'll leave it there just for give everyone else an opportunity to speak. And like I say, I'm hoping that we can get to a couple of the questions in chat. It's about street number 1. If it were to be connected, what would be the grading from Ravenscroft down to Wildpine? Because there's quite a dip right now. Just looking at the property as it is, and I know it'll be developed, but Wildpine is it appears to be lower than Ravenscroft, and so how would that look? I couldn't tell in the pictures that were shared.
Thank you, Steve. Jamie, on the grading.
Yes, very quickly. Thank you, Steve, for the comments. With the grading, all of this goes through a review process. The grading would be designed by engineers exactly for this reason, that accounts for not only the traffic safety, but also things like drainage. And all of that is considered as part of the subdivision application because that's the mechanism through which the road is created.
Steve also had a question about showing the front yard parking area. I think that was in one of the slides.
Mm-hmm.
Could you bring that up again? And Steve, I don't know if there's something specific you were looking for about the front yard parking, but we'll bring it up on the screen so at least we can have a look. Here we go. So yeah, what precisely is the front yard parking? If you could try to demonstrate that on the map.
Yeah, for sure. So let me see. I think I've got a little drawing tool here. So, oh, this purple is not a great color. I'll try to find something higher contrast. So here I've drawn a little arrow. This shows the front yard setback. That's 3 meters. So what that line is, that's the distance from the face of the building to the property line. Now, we know that realistically, when you've constructed a building, you can't perceive those property lines, like you won't notice it. So when you actually park a car, you would probably park it and use this space here. This distance here is 4.75 meters. That's the property line. Sorry, that's the property line to the road, so the edge of the road. So in total, you'd have about 7.75 meters. That's enough space to comfortably park a car. But when it comes to the zoning bylaw, we can only discuss front yard setbacks from the building to the property line, and everything after that is technically city owned, but people generally park their cars on it.
Okay. Pardon me, Steve, was that the clarity you were looking for on the front yard parking?
No, actually, it was around. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
It was, yeah, it was actually around. I understood there was parking. They were looking for a variance to be able to park out front of the apartment building or on the street. That's where I was looking. Where would that be allowed?
Yeah. So the variance is actually specifically related to. Oh, I'm on R4Z. Just to make sure we're on the same page, we're talking about the semi-detached building. Is that correct?
No, we're talking about the apartment.
Oh, okay. About the apartment, right? Okay. So yeah. So the apartment building, we have parking that is proposed, and that parking is shown between the road and the building face. The zoning bylaw generally does not permit this. So we are seeking a variance specifically to allow it to be in between the building and the road. This is a change that came to the zoning bylaw in 2018. It was generally trying to prevent people from making those parking pads in front of their house between the road and the house. But it applies to all dwellings, which includes a low-rise apartment building. So that's why we are seeking relief from it. And that's why it's included in the list here.
Okay. Yeah, I thought there was going to be additional parking, like along the sides coming up to those parking spots. So
yeah. Understood.
I understood now. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. I also think this would probably be a good time, because there's a couple questions in the Q&A as well, for Jamie or anyone on your team around the traffic study and what that's evaluated, what information that's provided. It still needs to be reviewed by city staff, but the applicant has submitted a traffic study. So if you give us a bit of an overview on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is quite common for a lot of applications to require a traffic study. Now, in this case, there's also a threshold to the number of units you need to have even to require a traffic study. And in many cases, for smaller developments, it's actually not required. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think this development is only 2 or 3 units over that threshold. So it's already kind of on the cusp. One thing that it does do is evaluate traffic sort of during the worst times of day. So they're called peak periods, which would be the AM peak and the PM peak, which we call it rush hour, right? It's the time when everyone's trying to, get somewhere, they're getting to school, they're getting to work, whatever the case may be. And the findings of that, the study that has been submitted with regards to those peak times is that there would be, I'm just going to pull it up as we're talking here. There are so the projected modal site generated trips has a total new vehicle trips for the AM of 20, so that being 5 in, 15 out, and the PM of 20, effectively almost reversing that from the AM. So the finding here is 20. Now, I know some of the comments were made about, there's going to be 100 cars. And I think it's important to remember, like, yes, there's going to be 90 some parking spaces that are proposed, at a rate of 1 per unit for residents. But important to recognize that it sounds like a big number, but they're not all going to be going all at once. It's not a case where they're just simply making rounds around the neighborhood, right? And so typically when we talk about even these peak times, people stagger their timing throughout the day. We were hearing in terms of different patterns and lifestyles, the different demographics that we were talking about, whether you're a young professional who's going to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, or whether you're a retiree who's maybe staying at home till 11:30 and then going to do some shopping or play golf or something in the afternoon. These are very different times, and so it kind of depends on there's assumptions made in these traffic studies that kind of make assumptions about generally who's going to be living in this building and what taken from across, not even just Ottawa, but taken across kind of trends across Canada and North America about, it tends to be this type of development, this type of area tends to generate this amount of traffic. And so important to remember that there's that, but also as Tamara was saying, and I totally recognize that the comment was made about, people traveling in their cars, they're not going to walk to services. But in fact, the more opportunities there are to walk to these services, actually a lot of people will take that opportunity and take more cars off the road. I mean, I think it's human nature that it's kind of like, if you need to just go to the Scotiabank 10 steps to the north, why would you drive to that? So I'm just saying, like, there's going to be a whole range of sort of modal activities, as we call it, or transportation choices that people are making. And the other thing to make the note is that by connecting Wildpine and Ravenscroft, it actually helps to distribute some of that traffic a little bit better. So not everything is being sort of concentrated on one street. And another thing to mention, because the conversation about safety as well, is the importance of redundancy to these streets. So if you're living on Ravenscroft or Wildpine right now, you're kind of in a locked sort of landlocked situation that if for any reason that road has to be blocked, imagine that if there's another derecho or something like that and a tree falls and blocks the road, an ambulance can't get in, you can't get out. By having the connection, it at least allows for in those emergency situations to have another mode of entry. So it's important too. I hope I covered everything, Councillor, in terms of the transportation. It is being, as you mentioned, being reviewed through this process as well by city staff.
Yeah, and thank you, Jamie. The transportation assessment is also available on the DevApp site, which is linked from my site. And if anyone has any trouble finding that documentation, let me know and we can send you a direct link to that. Related question from Linda about what can be done to mitigate the congestion on Stittsville Main Street, since obviously that's where any vehicles would be going. I'm happy to answer that because I think that's more of a city question. There are, first of all, there's in 2015 the city did the Stittsville Main Street Community Design Plan. Part of that was a capacity study to say how many homes, apartments, homes, townhomes, whatever, what was the capacity of Stittsville Main Street for new construction? And they determined that there's somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 new homes could be built along the Stittsville Main Street corridor before you're in an issue with servicing or overloading, from a technical point of view, the street. Since 2015, we've had fewer than 100 homes built along that stretch. So we're not at this point even approaching that maximum limit. Appreciating, though, there are times of the day in rush hour where it can be really busy on the street or when the school lets out just down the road. But there are a number of ways that the city is mitigating traffic. One is construction of Robert Grant Avenue, because a lot of the traffic right now on the street is to and from the new neighborhoods south of Fernbank. And so Robert Grant Avenue, where construction's underway, will funnel a lot of that traffic that's just passing through Stittsville, Maine. It'll take it more towards the east on Robert Grant. There are also new retail plaza and other commercial planned for the south part of Stittsville. And if there's an option to go to a grocery store close to home, closer to Fernbank, people will take that as opposed to coming to the north end of the street. OC Transpo bus service will continue to improve. This is designated as a transit priority route. So there's a Route 61 every 30 minutes today. In the next few years, it's very reasonable that we're going to see that increased every 15 minutes or every 20 minutes, especially once more people are living near the route and there's more demand. We have updated intersection designs and ongoing adjustments to signal timings to help with the traffic flow. And we also have the Stittsville Main Street Public Realm Plan that was approved last year to create better cycling and pedestrian infrastructure. This is actually one of the most walkable neighborhoods in suburban Ottawa. Schools nearby, schools, grocery stores, churches, healthcare, all within close walking distance. But one of the missing pieces is the sidewalks need to be upgraded, and we do need better pathways for bikes and for people in mobility devices. So there's a lot underway. No single one of those measures solves traffic on Stittsville, Maine, but each of them contribute to reducing the number of trips on that street as much as possible. So I hope that addresses that for Linda and other folks who had questions there. I want to go to our Syed or Syed. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. I'm going to prompt you to unmute, Syed.
Hello, this is Syed. Thank you, Glenn.
Hi, Syed. Welcome.
Thank you. I just have some concerns. Again, I'm a resident of Ravenscroft. Few from my experience, and before I get into that, just wanted to quickly highlight, I've grown up in a court myself, so love the space that was there, made amazing friends. The neighborhood was great, and we made great connections being in a place where we didn't have a lot of traffic and we would be able to spend time outside. I wanted the same thing for my kids now, and that is one of the reasons I bought a place here at Ravenscroft. And living into that with enough space, everything is great. But this proposal here to connect these two together concerns me because, one, my kids won't be able to spend the same time, the reason because of which I bought this place. Two, with the whole parking thing going on, I fear that today, if I have visitors and if I have few cars coming in, a few of my visitors have individual cars and they want to come in, they can easily come in and visit me. They don't have to worry about where they would park, or they would have to go long distances to park and then walk their way back, especially in winter. And to Jamie's point as well, you're right. In summer, people love to walk. I would love to walk and go to do these groceries, but in winter, I won't stand a chance, right? I would not take my bike out. I would not go for a walk because we all know how winters are here. The other aspect is that getting back to the parking spot, I know for a fact because the previous place I was living at, it had a low rise around the same amount of units as you're proposing here today. But the point is, people who don't have or don't want to pay for a parking spot, because this is eventually a charged feature, they would try their best to find these street parkings, and that would mean that there would be likely a car or cars parked outside of my residence, and visitors and my guests would have to find and go long distances and then walk back to my place to be able to see me. And along with that, the whole point of the traffic, I'm going to reiterate that it's good in summer. We may not see the whole 90 spots being empty. You're right, they're not going to roam around, but at the same time, adding 5 or 6 today, if I get out of Ravenscroft, and this one would go to you, Glenn, as well, as I sometimes stay at the edge of Ravenscroft to join Stittsville, Maine, because during the peak time, there's crazy traffic and there are just bumper to bumper cars out there, right? So I gotta wait for my turn. People are, again, nice. This is a nice neighborhood, but this is the situation today. Imagine adding 90 units on top of that. I'll pass it on to you guys.
Okay, thank you, Syed. So we've made a note of your comments, and I think you had asked one in the Q&A, but you covered it in your comments here. So thank you. On the Ravenscroft, this is something we can ask for from traffic services. There's probably not enough traffic or cars using that intersection now to warrant a traffic light installation. But in the future, it is something that we can ask to have studied. And if there is a need to help with a safe in and out from Ravenscroft, whether or not there's a large development at the end of Wildpine, it is something that we can ask the city's traffic team to evaluate. Right now, we have a priority for a traffic light near the Honey at Bray and Stittsville, Maine, but traffic conditions and safety is evolving. So it's definitely something we can look at in the future. I know someone also asked in the chat related to that, and safety was sidewalks. Is there any plan for a sidewalk on Ravenscroft? There's not currently a plan for a sidewalk on Ravenscroft, but again, that's something we can ask to have evaluated through the planning process or even through the longer term infrastructure. I'm just looking for some themes in the Q&A because we have a lot of questions before we go to our next raised hand. There's a number of questions about parking. So maybe I'll just start going through some of these. They're almost like very quick rapid fire parking questions. Will there be parking permitted on the street in front of the apartment complex? That's for Mary.
Yeah, me and Jamie just unmuted. Yeah, we would expect that parking would be permitted. It would probably be set back a little bit from the curves, just for safety. But one nice element of the proposed development is because there's a lot of continuous curb, that means there's more room to park on the street. And I think we covered this a little bit initially, but the apartment building the intent is for everyone who lives in the apartment building and for all their visitors to park on that property. So we would hope that the additional space on the street might be used by existing residents and their guests, and potentially a couple guests of perhaps the semi-detached. But given that there's a garage and a parking space in front of each unit, we would hope that they could fit their cars there. And in the event that they're not, the public street would accommodate public parking on the curbs there on the side of the road.
Okay, and so Lucas had asked if the road in front would be wide enough for cars to park. So I think we've answered that on parking. Let me just go through on looking for other parking questions in particular. Just want to make sure we may have covered them all, actually. I thought there was one other one, but I'm not seeing it. Actually, bigger picture parking. You're looking for basically one parking spot per apartment unit plus the required visitor parking. So this is from Dov, who asks, where did you see a family with one car only? Where will they all park their second car? And how do you plan to limit them to have only one car? So maybe summing that up, what's the justification or the rationale for one car per unit, and where would extra cars go, or how do you prevent extra cars?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it was Dev that asked that question. So thank you, Dev. I think there's a couple of things we need to point out. So one is, let's just remind ourselves of the unit breakdown here. So the majority of units in this building are going to be one bedroom or one bedroom plus den. So these are generally, and this is not a rule, but generally speaking, these are, so 31 one bedroom, 29 one bedroom plus den. A lot of those units then are going to have only one bedroom and are generally going to be accommodating a household size. Could be a family, but could be a single individual as well. Could be a couple, could be a couple of roommates, but generally speaking are only going to require one vehicle. When we're talking about the 2-bedroom units, yes, there are 34 of those. The evidence is really overwhelming from across the city in terms of what the market is needing and demanding right now. A lot of people, again, it's not a rule, but a lot of people are finding themselves, when we're talking about this housing affordability crisis, one of the low-hanging fruit ways to save some money to be able to find housing that they need or is closer to where they need it is to not have a second vehicle. And So that's one scenario, but a lot of cases, a lot of households these days are only having one. We're doing full subdivisions, like greenfield subdivisions on sort of the edge of the urban area, where there's only one parking space per unit. A lot of apartment buildings in suburban areas, not just in Stittsville, one space per unit. It's very, very common. And that's what we're seeing right across the city and elsewhere as well.
It might also be worth noting that since this is a rental building, people would be made aware of the situation before they choose to rent. And with the previous design, that was a plan of condominium where people were parking in front of their individual units. If you're looking to rent, a unit, you probably have a list. And if you need 2 parking spaces and you feel as though this wouldn't be able to accommodate, you might just choose not to live here. So that's always a reality. No one's really being forced to live here, and no one's being forced to give up their cars or being told that they can't own 2 cars. So that's perhaps also worth keeping in mind, that people make the choices that suit their lifestyles. And if this wouldn't suit their lifestyle, they probably wouldn't choose it, which then further to Jamie's point might mean that someone who only has 1 car for a household of 2 might choose to live here instead.
Okay. I'm going to go to one written question, then go to another person with their hand up. Actually, I'll share a comment first. Joanne says, no one will come down Ravenscroft Court. It's very difficult to get out on the main street. Wildpine will get all of the traffic because they have the traffic light. So noted, Joanne, thank you. Just looking if we have a quick question. Yes, from Anonymous, will the existing tree line be maintained between the existing townhouses and the proposed detached homes?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So when it comes to tree retention, we would be looking at this in further detail at the site plan phase. However, that said, any trees that can be retained that aren't where the building footprint would go, generally we want to retain those, especially if they're in good shape. They're not suffering from any diseases. They're not, as long as those trees are in good health, you would, construct a fence and try to protect them from construction. So that's definitely something we'd be looking at, especially adjacent to those houses to provide screening. One thing to know is if those trees are on the property line, we would really want to protect that. And maybe to further explain what site plan control is, after a zoning bylaw amendment goes to city council and is, in this case, potentially approved, that's the hope, then the next round of technical review would commence. So after city council says, yes, you can proceed with this concept, then there would be more meetings and more revisions with staff to refine the really nitty-gritty details on, where should the trees go? Are the curbs the right radius? Are the trees conflicting with some sort of underground utility? That comes up a lot. So making sure that those trees are protected would definitely be a really big consideration during that site plan control process. And the original application did have a tree conservation plan that was prepared. So we would be comparing that with the proposed development going forward. So we do know which trees exist on the site. So we would be wanting to preserve whichever ones don't conflict with the development and try to retain as many as possible.
Okay, another quick question from Lucas, and then we're going to go to Mark. How tall are the proposed semi-detached townhomes? Are they 2 stories or 3 stories? And do you have any details about bedrooms or size and so on?
It's a great question. I'll just take this one, Tamara. It's a great question, Lucas. We're actually not really at that level of detail right now. Suffice it to say, it'll be compliant with zoning, but it hasn't really been designed to the point where we have, very specific dimensioning for building height at this time.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Mark, who has his hand up. Thank you, Mark, for your patience. I'm going to prompt you to unmute.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good. Welcome.
Yep, thank you very much. I'll try to keep it brief here, but I guess I've got a couple questions or comments. Like one of the concerns I raised during the meeting on the original development was that the traffic study seemed to be done at a time right in the middle of COVID where I think it's reasonable to say that there was a fraction of the cars in rush hour traveling that there would be at this point in time, in addition to the other developments that have already been added to the area or approved. So I guess just confirming that any new study is using new information. I guess a quick comment on the sidewalk. Like, I question how that's possible now based on the road width that already exists. Like, it's certainly an interesting concept, but how does that work? I guess with the existing space that's already there. And I guess a question for the builder. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the residents have received this legal package with some sort of requirement to contest the potential outright ownership of the applicant. I wonder if they might be able to speak to that and why we're receiving this in this context and not for the previous development. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you're sending people quite technical information and asking them to verify that or incur cost themselves to get independent legal advice to clarify what information they've even been sent. I mean, it's basically a package ready for a professional planner to decipher themselves. So I don't know if that could be spoken to a little bit and what, you know, importance the residents may have to respond to that promptly.
Yeah, I can maybe address that, Mark. I'm aware of the letter. A resident provided a copy. It's from a third party. It's not from the applicant, although it's relating to this property. So it's not a part of this planning process. I don't want to try to interpret it or provide advice as to what people should do. I think in general, the letter is suggesting that people review they provided a map and that people review the property lot lines. If people have concerns, I would encourage you to speak with a real estate lawyer, but I want to be really cautious to not provide any interpretation or advice here because it is outside of this planning process that we're considering here. You did ask about the traffic study originally and COVID traffic levels and what effect that would have. Jamie, can you clarify about timing of when traffic counts were done and any comments on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark, and thanks for raising it. I was not the author of the traffic study. Obviously, I'm not a transportation engineer. I was just scouring it to try to find any indication about sort of timing and stuff. But I think the thing to say, first of all, is that because it has to comply with City of Ottawa guidelines, any review process is going to, consider details in that regard in terms of, when things are considered. But it's also not necessarily standing on the corner and counting. Like sometimes that is part of the process, but sometimes it's also, like I said, assumptions about, what is normal behavior for this type of development. The other thing to mention is that, sure, if counts were done kind of at the height of COVID, that might have been one scenario. But I think we're seeing as we kind of emerge out of the pandemic, hopefully forever, that we're starting to see that actually patterns have changed pretty sort of permanently in the sense that, I was talking earlier about, whatever number of cars there are, they're not all traveling all at the same time. And I think actually what's going to happen is even I am skeptical that all of the residents of this building are going to be within the working population. I think, like we were saying before, and Councillor Gower was saying, a lot of retirees would be there. But even if a lot of them were working, the reality is so many people are working from home at least part of the week. And so already you've adjusted numbers based on that as well. So all I can say, and I know this is not a very satisfying answer, but all I can say is that, this is being reviewed by staff as part of this application. It goes directly to the traffic engineers at the city who look at these things. And so suffice to say that they'll be, making sure that it's a cogent and effective study.
I didn't unmute. Mark, did you have any other questions or comments you wanted to share?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's just a little bit alarming how much is based on speculative information. Like from a traffic study, some anecdotal information on average neighborhoods. I mean, try to turn left in front of there now. You know, like it's nearly impossible at most times of day, let alone rush hour, without a wait time when you're one car. So I think it's just like from a practical point of view, bean counting seems to be the answer there. And anyway, I mean, it's a question that's glossed over and was the first time around too. I appreciate there isn't cold hard information on that, but I mean, just by nature of the like speculative demographics of the residents, you know, a lot of them would be going to work in the high tech sector, in the public sector, where chances are they are leaving at a similar time. And if any of them have kids, those are all being deployed in a pretty small time window in the morning. So anyway, I think that's about the level of detail this at the moment. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And the traffic study still does need review and scrutiny from the city's traffic planner. So that's another part of the review process. And there may be mitigation measures that are recommended or required, or it could even affect the viability of this project. So nothing's taken for granted or taken at face value. It is studied and reviewed, and something that my team and I are looking at as well in terms of, are the assumptions they made credible, and are the outcomes that they're predicting credible as well. So it does get some good scrutiny on it.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to try to go to a few more questions, just trying to group these thematically and trying to get some very specific ones to this project, and then we'll kind of move up because there's some higher level questions about planning and so on. Is there a target rental cost for these apartments?
Yeah, my understanding is it would be market-based rentals. So, you know, looking forward for when the building is constructed will be a few years in the future. So the developer would be looking at what the market rates for rents are at the time, and would price them accordingly to ensure that someone was able to rent those units and attracted to that space.
Okay. A question from Claire. It's hard to tell how much land will separate the new proposed apartments from the backyard property lines of the homes on Ravenscroft. Will the lovely existing trees remain? So can you give us some more details about, I guess, what's in that green space between the property line and the proposed apartment?
Yeah, so I can speak to the separation, and maybe Jamie, you could take a double check the tree information while I'm doing that. I can only have so many screens. So the building would be set 7.5 meters away from those property lines for the buildings to the southwest on Ravenscroft. And an important consideration we were, really taking some deep thought on was how to orient the building in the best way to prevent overlook and privacy issues. So an important consideration is that the units would be looking not into the backyards, but rather towards, let me see if I can draw. So the units would be facing these directions here where I've drawn with the arrows. So they would be facing towards the Pool Creek and the road, whereas the portion of the building that's adjacent to that property line, or that's adjacent to the setback, that is 7.5 meters from that property line, that would be the side of the unit. So we would be trying to make sure there's not really big windows. They would be either small windows or frosted windows, and we would probably be seeing bigger windows, really trying to face those nice natural features like Pool Creek or the street. So safety, security, and privacy were taken into consideration quite a bit during the design. And I'll stop here in case Jamie can chime in on the tree question.
Yeah, I was just looking a little bit at the report that was provided with the application with regards to trees, but I think the easier answer for those who are wondering is that I think Tamara actually did a great job of answering a few minutes ago, which is basically that if there are trees there that are in good shape and they can be retained, then generally they will be retained. If there is an opportunity to plant more, that may be reviewed through the site plan control application, which, as Tamara was saying, comes after this stage. It's a more detailed level of review, and landscaping is part of that. And there will be consideration for exactly this interface that we're looking at here. So without going through and specifically saying, well, this tree is staying, but this one isn't, or something like that, I think it's suffice to say that there's a lot of runway here that we still have to go through in the process to actually look at these considerations, and there will be absolutely thought put to this. In fact, when this design was initially proposed, one of the city's first comments is make sure there's sufficient space between the existing townhouses to the west there, and the building was actually moved a little bit further east as a result. So we're very cognizant of it already, and will continue to be so.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving through it. So I am concerned we're running short on time. So again, I'll ask Jamie and Tamara if you can try to be as short as possible with these ones. Roger asks if there will be a public path for pedestrians and cyclists connecting to directly north to the shopping plaza.
It's a great question. That was something that we looked at early on in the original submission, as a matter of fact. There were some concerns with, the impact on the wetland actually by doing that. Additionally, in the fullness of time, the expectation is that there will be some kind of connectivity of recreational pathway, but not necessarily through this site, but we're talking like north-south Stittsville. But as a result, we were advised to take that particular pathway off. But fortunately, with just the short walk to the end of Ravenscroft, you connect with the sidewalk and you're able to get to the plaza pretty easily.
Okay. Dov is asking, why connect Wildpine and Ravenscroft? So quickly, I know we've touched on it a little bit, but it's a question that comes up a lot. What's the justification for connecting the two ends of the street?
Absolutely. So the justification is that connectivity is one of the foundational ideas behind urban design and urban planning. The more ways that you can get to the places that you need to go, the better it is. The safer it is, as we were saying, in terms of redundancy in case one has to be closed. So you have that option. There's also, I can imagine that, getting from we're hearing a lot about Ravenscroft and sort of getting onto Stittsville. In some cases, it may make more sense to go to the traffic light to the south, but in some cases, it may make more sense if you're going right to continue on to Ravenscroft. It gives you that option. And also, as I was mentioning before, this was always the intention to have this road connected, dating back to, I suspect it's the early 90s, late 80s when the subdivision was originally conceived of. And it was always the intention to connect because, as I said, that's just a best practice and a principle that's always used.
Okay. I'm going to do a couple more questions, then we're going to go to Phil. So Mary asks, will there be any available green space to provide a small park for kids or adults?
Yeah, we actually had a couple conversations with the city. They did not want to see a park in that triangular lot. It's too small. They have certain standards. Parks has a minimum park size, and this did not fit that minimum park size. And when you deliver parks that are too small, they get into those community crime prevention through design problems that Jamie had mentioned. So Parks actually said they would not be interested in a park here. That said, the green space surrounding the apartment building would be programmed as an amenity space for those residents. So although existing residents wouldn't be able to access it, most likely those residents who move there would have some amenity space to enjoy.
Okay, and relating to that same block where the townhomes are, there's a few questions / comments from an anonymous resident. If you had one home instead of two on that block, would it conform to the setback so you wouldn't need zoning changes? Have you considered a triangular building? And then I guess it's a duplicate question. Why not make it a small park? But you've answered that last one.
Yeah.
So if you could quickly address those.
Yeah, one building we would still need the setbacks just because the shape of the building versus the shape of the lot, it doesn't match up very nicely. And triangular buildings, they create triangular rooms of any kind, create a lot of dead, unusable space. What winds up happening is you price a unit a certain price per square foot. And then whoever moves into it can't use these weird, awkward shapes, and they pay for space they can't access. So it's generally, you try to avoid triangular buildings, especially a semi-detached triangular building that would want to be avoided. So hence the square building makes it a lot more usable and for a future resident.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go to Phil, who has his hand up. So Phil, if you could unmute, and we should be able to hear you.
Thank you. I have some empathy for the people who feel this is a very dense area compared to what we're used to in Stittsville. But I think we all have to put a bit of water in our wine and understand that costs of housing today is high enough to make it affordable, as they've suggested, is tough if you don't go with smaller buildings and you need this kind of density. And I think they've done a moderately decent job of trying to put a reasonable amount of housing close to the walking area, the shopping centers, and so on. So generally speaking, I think it's a reasonable plan for what this area will accommodate. And the good thing about an apartment in this situation is the backyard, if you like, that you're looking on isn't interfering with people. It's the wetland. There's nobody there. And just one final thing, I appreciate somebody at staff have said we don't want access to the wetland area. I've asked in the past about a boardwalk or something in there, and that wasn't opposed by the Conservation Authority. It may be opposed by the staff who may have to maintain the walkway area. There should be some access to the wetlands so that people can appreciate them, and rather than they're always fighting to try and save wetlands, but nobody has access to it. So this contributes to that lack of access to wetlands. So anyway, if there's a way of accommodating access to that, I think it would be a positive improvement to the site. Anyway, a reasonable effort by FOTAN to put the kind of density we unfortunately need in Stittsville to make this a viable community with diverse things. We'd all like to be what we used to have, but that isn't happening now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil, and thank you for articulating that suggestion around the walkway around the creek. I know you had a question in the Q&A as well, so thanks for bringing that to us live, and certainly something we're going to be exploring through this process as well. Some opportunities to better connect pathways and natural areas. So thanks, Phil. We're going to come to Lucas in a moment, but I did want to go through some quick questions here. It's on the Q&A. We're making our way through. And I'll share some comments too as we go. Joanne agreed with Steve, one of our earlier commenters. It's too much. She says the location is not practical for the number of units. Joshua has a question about if there's any details on demographics. What are the projected demographics for residents used in the traffic study? Percentage of seniors or millennial working singles? Does the traffic study get into that level of detail, Jamie?
No, it doesn't, Councillor, and partly because there's no projected demographics for this building. We're hypothesizing here about who might live there, but also it changes over time.
It's also perhaps useful to know that the traffic study uses a computer model to generate a lot of information. And those computer models are producing information based on guidelines that the city produced. So there's not as much speculation there. Jamie and I just aren't traffic engineers, so we're not confident saying definitively. So I thought I'd mention that.
Can I mention, I think traffic studies are completely useless. I think they're models. They give you an idea. They tell you there's going to be more traffic. It never, ever matches. And there's really never any way to tell if it matches what was predicted. I have zero faith of the usefulness of traffic studies. So there. Okay, some more comments. Margaret lives on Wildpine across from the retirement home. She has a lot of comments about parking and the traffic. I'm just trying to summarize. There's a lot of workers from the retirement home and visitors to the retirement home, the Wildpine retirement residents that park on the street. very little space to drive up and down the street, including with delivery trucks. And same on Ravenscroft, a lot of on-street parking as it is. Margaret's point is neither street is built to accommodate an additional 100+ vehicles from residents, and then additional traffic from non-residents. We have many children on Wildpine and many elderly people from the retirement home. More traffic will be very dangerous for those individuals, and getting out from Main Street, in and out from Main Street on either Wildpine and Ravenscroft is horrible. So we've heard a few comments about that today. So thank you, Margaret, for sharing that. Joanne says the apartment building is lovely. It just needs to be put somewhere else. Thank you, Joanne. A comment from Anonymous about the busyness on Main Street and the time it takes to get from Wildpine up to Carp Road, a lot of congestion. And another note about in cold weather, people will not choose to walk or bike. So thank you for that comment. There's a question about the impact on school crowding from Rajani. Maybe I'll answer that. There is crowding, overpopulation or close to capacity population at many, many schools in our neighborhood. There's portables at most schools in our community. It's something I have been talking a lot about over the past year. I completely understand the need for more homes for people to live in. But I have a big concern about the infrastructure, and it's now schools or family doctors are provincial responsibility. Things like transit or roads or police stations or rec centers are city responsibility. We have a real challenge at the municipality to properly fund the infrastructure to keep up with the growth. And I'm really concerned about the lack of provincial plans to keep up with schools, doctors, and other amenities in high growth areas. So it is definitely a concern. I think for the past 50 years, maybe longer in Stittsville, there's a condition on every title that includes a note about lack of capacity in the public school. So this has been a concern in our community for many, many years. And I would encourage you to write to our MPP or even the Premier with concern as well, because it's something I've been raising and our mayor has been raising. It's one thing to say we need more homes, we need to have the infrastructure and all the other pieces that go alongside homes as well. So thank you for that question. Ian notes that walking along Wildpine, most driveways have 2 cars. Thank you, Ian. Another question about, I think this is about guest parking. 2 parts to the question. One is about guest parking. Is there any way to control parking with guests, I guess overflow parking? And then what about an emergency situation? Is there capacity to evacuate if everyone needed to leave that building quickly at once? How does the planning work for emergency situations?
Yeah, I can answer that question. For visitor parking, 19 parking spaces are required and 19 are provided. 15 are right in front of the building. So we would really hope that folks can find it easily enough that they would just park right in front of the building and not park on the street. And then the remaining are inside the parking garage, which might be a good spot for regular guests who can find their way around. In terms of emergency response and evacuation, that has to be considered as part of the design. The architects have to take that into consideration with things like fire code, safety requirements for the Ontario Building Code. And they have to give thought about, how far away is a unit from a stairwell and how easily can they get to that stairwell? Will the stairwell be safe in the time of a fire? So that's all going into the design. And then in terms of evacuation, the emergency there are emergency departments in the City of Ottawa who review the plans and provide their comments on it. So we would expect them to review that and provide us with feedback if there was something that they felt needed adjustment.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go to Lucas in just a moment, and then we'll come back to the Q&A. There's a few specific ones about the development I want to make sure we get to, and then we'll go into some of the bigger picture planning and intensification questions that have been asked in the Q&A. And we'll try to wrap things up at 9, but I think we're on track for that. So let's go to Lucas, who has been patiently waiting with his hand up. Lucas, if you could unmute, and we should be able to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Lucas.
Thank you for hosting this community consultation. My question is relating to the how it's going to be organized with the four-story building inside. Is how many washrooms is it one or two washrooms in each of the units depending on the one or two with the den? What's the ratio about the washrooms in each of the units? Also is why I understand it was asked about, you mentioned about for smaller units, but why is it still not recommended at least two, like three-room apartments? Because it just, there might be some like small family with maybe 3 kids or some of that that might want to move because they don't want to have a yard to mow and stuff like that, and maybe more cheaper than owning a house or some of that. So I would like to ask about that as well. Is it possible to have solar panels on the roof if it faces the correct direction? Because if it's a flat roof, if for environmental benefit for the solar, if that's possible. So that's all I have to ask. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lucas.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas, for the questions. Good ones there. I'll take them kind of in reverse order. So with regards to the solar panels, I mean, potentially you can see the roof on the screen here. Perhaps they could accommodate solar panels. There's no plans to do that right at this moment, but it's also early in the process. And potentially as we move along, particularly at the site plan control stage, which is the next step, potentially that could be something that's looked at. Of course, we all care about sustainability measures like that. Your second question was about well, one was about the number of bathrooms. Undecided right now. I think in general, we're usually looking at just 1 bathroom per unit, even if that unit has 2 bedrooms. And those are assumptions that are used as part of these civil engineering studies, which look at the number of units and how many sinks and toilets and dishwashers are going to be used and what the water demands are. So all that gets reviewed through the city, and those that information is all included. And then your middle question was a good one about the range of housing, like sort of unit types and number of bedrooms and so on. And it's certainly a really valid point. And it really comes down to the demand at the moment tends to be towards more like 1 bedrooms and 2 bedroom apartments, particularly in a place like Stittsville. It's not to say that there's no demand for 3 units. It just so happens that there aren't those proposed in this particular building. Often what happens is if a larger household or a family are interested in something with 3 bedrooms, they tend to look for more like sort of a townhouse format in a place like Stittsville. Not always, it's not a rule, but just something that's factored into the market demand. And so the real need here at the moment in terms of market demand and forthcoming demographics is more on the smaller side, 1 and 2 bedrooms. But great questions, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. So there's a couple questions and a bunch of comments. So in the few minutes we have left, we'll try to get through these. And I think a lot of these are more ones that I can answer or address. A few from an anonymous participant here. What is the main cause of the housing emergency? That's a big question. It would take far more than 15 minutes. And there are many people studying this and commenting on this. We do not have enough homes for the population. And there's a lot of reasons for that: demographic changes, immigration, and affordable housing in particular. The federal government, for a large part, stopped funding affordable housing or nonprofit housing in the 1990s. And we are right now hitting a wall where that cycle or that generation, maybe 2 generations of not funding properly, has in large part led us to the crisis that we have here now. So there are a lot of factors. And I cover and write about this a lot in my newsletter and in my weekly videos on my website. So we'll be continuing to talk about this for the next few years. Another question, why are 15-minute neighborhoods being promoted here, and are there any in Canada? 15-minute neighborhoods is a bit of a buzzword right now that basically means walkable communities where most services are within a reasonable walking distance. This part of Stittsville Main Street is actually already considered a 15-minute walkable neighborhood. There are schools, churches, grocery stores, medical services, all sorts of amenities close by. And so yes, there are many 15-minute neighborhoods in Canada. Certainly almost any neighborhood built before the 1950s, pre-car, was a 50-minute neighborhood. With car-oriented suburbs, things tended to be farther apart. So we're trying to look for ways to encourage more within walking distance and encouraging walkability within neighborhoods. So that's what that means. Anonymous asks, this is a question, I'm not sure who could answer this, but which proposal makes the most money for the proponent? How long have they owned the land? And you mentioned the original proposal had drainage challenges. Was it absolutely impossible to build the first proposal?
Yeah, sorry,
ahead.
do you want to go?
Go ahead, Tamara.
Yeah, so we brought forward, I think, 3 or 4 perhaps designs to the City and Conservation Authority. We could not come to a design that worked for everyone. And each, the City and Conservation Authority both have their own rules and requirements. So based on, us seeing that process, it did not seem as though that development was able to be built. And this design, we're seeing a lot fewer challenges. So we think this one is a lot more buildable. You're muted again, Glenn.
Oh, thank you. In terms of how long the land has been owned, is there a quick answer to that? Does anyone know?
I don't think I know the answer.
I don't either. Carmine's here.
Approximately 4 years, Jamie.
Okay, thank you, Carmine. Okay, Joshua has a question about neighborhood development and the definition of intensification. For residents of either street, can we expect further low-rise development on our streets over the next few years? I can give you a quick answer, Joshua, and if you wanted to follow up by email, I can give you a more complete one. Oh, thank you to Tamara for bringing this up. Along Stittsville Main Street and in the kind of purple dotted area on either side, there is a potential for more intensification or more density. In general, it's up to 4 stories, but it depends. It's not an automatic 4 stories. They have to demonstrate that there's proper transition to nearby neighborhoods. There's limitation with the floodplain that we've been talking about. There's setbacks and other zoning standards that apply here. But in general, in these areas on either side of Stittsville, Maine, up to 4 stories could be considered. So if you see empty lots in particular, it's quite likely over the next 15 to 20 years, they would be redeveloped. And the idea is that we do intend to have the growth of population, so about 400 or 500,000 people in the next 20 to 25 years, accommodating as many of those homes as we can within the existing built-up area. So about half would be within the current urban and suburban areas, and about half would be through suburban expansion out into farmland. And we're really trying to limit that expansion into the farmland. So that's kind of a quick answer to that one. Going through the Q&A, a comment from Ian: we are retirees and we wouldn't live there. Are all of these units intended to be for sale, or will they be rented by a management company?
These are intended to be rentals. The apartment building would be rentals, and the semi-detached would be for sale.
Okay, thank you. And that was from Anonymous. Another anonymous question: why is the developer looking to purchase the portion of the easement behind the 2 townhomes?
I don't actually know if they are. I'm not actually too certain about that one. Yeah, I'm not seeing it on our plan of subdivision, so I'm not too certain which easement this is referring to.
Okay, perhaps if you could send us an email, Anonymous, and we could check for you on that offline. what do all the circles in front of the building mean? I think that's maybe going back to the previous map you had up, showing
Yeah.
circles in front of the building. Is this
So
map,
these,
perhaps?
yeah, so these are the trees that would potentially need to be removed. As you can see, the trees, the outline of the tree is shown here. That's sort of the canopy. Because this is where the parking lot is envisioned, they wouldn't obviously survive living in a sea of asphalt. But we do have these circles down here between the parking lot and the road. This is an area where we are contemplating adding trees to provide a bit of a visual buffer and some greenery between the road and the parking.
Okay. Ian asks, what are the net benefits to the residents of Wildpine Court? Ian, I saw this question earlier, and I have a graphic I want to show you. But I think maybe I could acknowledge this is change for Wildpine and Ravenscroft, whether it's a 4-story building or whether it's the townhomes or any kind of development has an impact, and probably has a negative impact on the immediate neighbors. Definitely, I don't think there's any way you can minimize that. A lot of this planning process is about understanding what the impacts could be and making sure that they're mitigated to the extent possible. The benefits are not to the residents of Wildpine or Ravenscroft, maybe not even to Stittsville Main Street. It's a collective benefit. It's addressing it so that an older couple has an affordable place where they could downsize to, or a first-time, a young professional has someplace in the community where they can live. And I just wanted to share a chart because I think it really illustrates this well, just in terms of the. I'm going to stop your screen share, Tamara, and bring up another chart. The real challenge that we have right now as a municipality in continuing to deliver services. So there's 3 bubbles on the screen and some of the overlap. It's impossible to deliver lower taxes or keep taxes low without either more density or cutting services. It's impossible to have low density and not have to raise taxes at some point because it costs so much to deliver those services. So just want to leave this up for a couple moments. This is about long-term financial viability of a municipality. I don't think anyone wants to see higher and higher taxes, and one way that we can achieve that is through more density beyond the larger societal issue of the housing crisis. There's a question about how is a 4-story building approved off of Main Street? Isn't 2 stories allowed on a small street? So I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but 4 stories is allowed on Stittsville Main Street. And the Wildpine residence, because it is exactly adjacent to Stittsville Main Street, was approved 4 years ago because of that proximity to the Main Street. And in the official plan, we saw that map a little earlier. In the official plan, 4 stories can be considered on streets close to the Main Street, like Stittsville Main. Stittsville Main's limited to 4 stories. On a wider street like Hazeldean Road or Terry Fox, the official plan would allow for more than a 4-story low rise with some conditions attached. It's not automatic by any means. And then there's a comment here from Claire, who says, I can understand the need for housing of some kind on that site, but not the number of units proposed. A smaller development would address and mitigate some of the very valid concerns expressed. Thank you, Claire, for your comment. That's all of the Q&A comments, and we have no more hands up. There's a lot of questions and content. So I want to say a big thank you to all of the residents who participated tonight and asked some really good questions. And I think that did provide a lot more clarification for some of the things people were wondering about. And I do want to say thank you to Jamie and Tamara. And we also had Carmen and Rod in the background for participating tonight. Thank you to Kara and Lisa from my team who've been here behind the scenes taking some notes and helping manage all the questions as they've come in. Really encourage you, if you've been watching, if you haven't already, email your comments to Lisa Stern or email Lisa to ask to be added to that notification list. That information is all up on my website. It's at glengower.ca/development. And we will post a copy of this presentation tonight to the YouTube channel and to my website. So it's almost 9 o'clock. It's been a long night. Thank you everyone for spending your time with us this evening. And if there's anything else you're wondering about, have any comments, email me and we will do our best to track down the answers. So thanks everybody and have a good evening. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.